All right, so let's talk about Gen AI. I'm going to go over 10 things that you need to know, and then I'll make some more videos as things update. Now, in typical fashion, there's no endorsement for this, and I'm not pretending to be an expert, but I want to share some of the lessons that I've learned. First of all, having a actual platform to use AI on a military network is a big deal. It just is. If you have been part of anything that has to do with trying to implement new policy, wow, what a pain, especially with all the security protocols. So I'm excited for this, even if it's a little clunky. That's sort of how anything we produce works when you're first starting out. So, point number one is very important to know that this is phase one, which is NIPR, and it can only be accessed via the NIPRNet or VPN. And I know that can be slightly disappointing because, especially, and I'll mention this later in the video, Camo GPT had that IL6 that could do classified information. There are some other classified content, but can't talk about that here. Really, the big difference is when you are logging on to use this, you either have to be VPN or at something that has that NIPRNet connected. You can't be at home on your personal computer with a CAC. And that's sort of the key takeaway that I want you to understand for those people that try to go home and maybe knock out a little bit more work. Now, a common question is, all right, so I'm on Gen AI. Is this connected to the internet? What does this look like? And so I have a note here. This was something I looked up in the content. So, yes, it is connected to the internet, but it is essentially in a controlled way. So, think about it being web grounded against a Google search. And this is inside of that little safe government sandbox. Yeah, I can pull in up to date information from the public, and that will help because you can reduce hallucinations, try to gain more sources. But this is still running inside a DoD environment, not on like that typical consumer internet. So if you were to put Gen AI and Gemini up against each other, they do look different, feel different, and you're going to get different answers. All right. So point number two is what has been leading right now when you're using Gen AI is the Gemini for government, that source. And this is owned by Google Cloud. This is IL5. Remember, what IL5 means is that you can do CUI. IL4 below that is not CUI. And that's a really big deal when you think about how often what we end up working on has CUI content in it. I work very consistently on the commercial versions of Gemini, Chat, and Claude, all paid versions. And I have noticed Gemini is very, very good at reviewing data in math, partially, especially when you think about the data. It owns YouTube, so it's got a lot of training from all those transcripts. So it's not a bad model, really. If you log on to Gen AI, which I can't show here, you'll see, okay, it offers Gemini, it's got Grok. We have this in works with ChatGPT. For those of you who know, Claude was nixed recently. We'll see whether that is a permanent decision or not. The whole concept is if you've ever used Perplexity, which is on the outside, that is one where you can choose what model you want to use to ask a question versus if you are in a very specific one, say Gemini, yes, you can say, I want like the fast version or the more complex, deep thinking, but it's not going to go to its competitor to pull a different model. And that's really what you just need to know in terms of this point. All right. So, point number three, something for you to know is when you are using Gen AI, okay, what are tokens? Liz's brain says, okay, it's AI brain space. Once again, why I've found I've been leaning more like to more using Gemini is because it has a lot of tokens. So I guess if I had to really explain this simply, it's AI doesn't exactly read whole words, it reads tokens, so chunks of text. And your context window is how many tokens it can keep in the short term memory at once. So really big picture is if you have more tokens, it can remember more from the documents in the chat that you have. And if you've ever been on a chat and then something has just completely gone awry and you go, wait, it's forgetting stuff, typically it's lost that brain space. So another term that is helpful to know when you are using Gen AI is RAG. And RAG is used in any type of AI tool, but this is retrieval augmented generation. Sure, it sounds fancy, but it's okay. Step one, I'm going to upload a document or connect to a data source. And then step two, that model will actually search those docs for relevant chunks. And then in the final step, the model writes an answer using those chunks, like those different chunks, instead of guessing from memory. So, pretty cool. And you can sometimes adjust RAG, which is helpful. Point number 5, and this is what I have found messing around with the Gemini model on Gen AI is, okay, how much can it kind of chew on? Um, so I compared this because Gemini 2.5 Pro allows you to have 3,000 files per prompt. And then it's kind of crazy. Like the PDFs can be 50 megabytes and almost 1,000 pages. It's really, really wild. Now, the DoD does have some smaller caps because of just cost and security. But overall, you are going to see this is going to have more capacity than the other models that are available. I want to say, for reference, Nipper GPT, when I was using it, I could upload 20 documents. So we are moving in the right direction. I do want to highlight some real world limits right now and hopeful that they will continue to get better. But the session memory I've noticed is not nearly as good as the commercial. There are no project features, and this is being able to get more specific in those contexts and kind of clump things. You can do, for example, in ChatGPT, that would be making a custom GPT, and then both in Gemini and Claude, like projects or gems. So that's a bummer. With image generation, not currently there. Now maybe it's changed, but that sort of stinks. So keep on going for stock images. And I kind of have noticed, I feel like it has a short attention span. I'm having to remind it of things a little bit more. So thus far, I've been a little bit under impressed by it. So moving on, talking about hallucinations. If you're not familiar with AI, that sometimes you get this quote and it's like very confident, it says, hey, this is the quote, this is who wrote it. And then you go and fact check it and it's not there. We have to be mindful that AI is not afraid to guess confidently and be incorrect. So, why does this happen? Well, models don't necessarily look up the truth, they predict the next token based on patterns. So, if they don't have the right information, they're just going to predict, and then they could actually invent details. So, you can, that can be something as simple as just a wrong date, a mixed quote or reference, or just an incorrect summary of a policy. When we think about, if I go on to Google, it's a search engine. If I'm using Gemini, it is a pattern machine. Often that pattern will match reality, but sometimes it doesn't. And that is where I really advise, do not take what it gives you and just send it out and say, yeah, we're good to go. All right, next point, very important to know, what are the knowledge cutoffs? Right now, I think when I looked at it, it was early 2025. So, depending on when you're watching this, it could be later on. Quickest way for you to figure that out is go into the model and say, when is your latest cutoff date? Pretty much what you need to know. That's very simple. I think I saw an issue with this because it was upset with saying Department of War versus Department of Defense. And that's just one example of where is the cutoff. Now, for those of you that loved Camo GPT or Nipper GPT, what has happened to those? Well, Nipper GPT has sunsetted and Camo GPT has been scaled back to focus more on research and development. The only frustrating thing is if you had created something really cool and one of those elements, it's a little bit harder and you have to try to recreate that in Gen AI and figure out what model works best. So, one other thing to think about in terms of, sometimes when we talk about how do I choose a model, people say bigger is better. If it's got more processing power, we like it. And the way that I sort of think about it is, this big model is got data that's an ocean size worth in a smaller one. can be a bathtub. And if you're trying to find a rubber ducky in it, which one is a little bit easier to find? Now, you don't necessarily get to control the models that are available to you, but I do recommend messing around with them, not just falling in love with one of them because you may see that one is better for a certain type of task versus another. And then if you recognize, all right, I'm working with the biggest model available to me, then let me use RAG really efficiently to try to shrink that ocean a little bit. Really, you wanted to focus in on your problem, on what you're trying to do instead of collecting all this other random information that's not necessarily helpful. And I'll leave you with this is that these are really what you can do to get some quick wins and just try right away. If you are someone who has not experimented with this, think about document summarization, content rewriting, asking it to establish risk or even helping with coding for someone that's never done code. I've been able to work with that and it's been challenging, but I don't think I could have ever done code without having that AI assistant. Last but not least, make sure you stay out of trouble. This is IL5, so unclassified CUI. Make sure there isn't anything that's super sensitive or pre-decisional that could potentially get you in trouble. Follow any standard that you would do when it comes to NIPR. And remember, everything's monitored. So if you don't want the government to know you're working on that, don't put it in there. And of course, really, that key one is that you got people that are very reticent to use AI. And then you got the other ones that are saying, yeah, I'm going to totally use it and I'm not going to double check it. And that can really lead to you just giving wrong answers. A couple of things that I have found helpful and just this as a bonus is thinking through different prompts for context, whether, hey, this is the mission that I'm working right now, or creating a library of all these prompts that you find if you're trying to sort through emails or you're trying to summarize documents and you get a really good prompt. You don't have to redo it each time. Thinking through the best way to use RAG with the documents is another great way to make you more effective and efficient. Overall, sitting there going, all right, how can I make AI draft and review things for me and be that first pass to save me a little bit of time? So, as I kind of close this out, I will tell you I'm pretty disappointed with how Gen AI is working right now, but I do believe it's going to get better. It's just anything that first comes out has bugs in it, and those guardrails and safety protocols are pretty tough. I cannot mention it enough to always use your own judgment and not trust the output that is coming out of the AI. And then finally, I do really recommend to try to be an early adopter because this is a lot of people sit there and go, nope, this is a phase, this is a bubble, and I'm going to suddenly not have to worry about this. That is incorrect. I think it will evolve, it will grow, it will probably change in ways that we don't even recognize right now. But do not be the one trying to catch up with this. So, as there are updates to Gen AI, I will drop a new video. And if there's anything that you'd like to learn about this or correct me because I am totally still learning, drop in the comments and let me know.